And the mute all thing as well,
Yep.
right?
Here we go for mute all.
Well, welcome everybody to Lit Balm. Tonight we have an amazing feature, something a little bit unusual. We're celebrating 50 years of Ploughshares Poetry. And it's also a celebration of the winter 2021-22 issue featuring Rebecca Foust, Tatiana Johnson-Boria, John Okrent, Kwame Dawes, and led by John Skoyles, poetry editor, and DeWitt Henry, founder and editor emeritus, I would say, right? Emeritus. And then I'm gonna introduce one of our missing hosts today. He actually is right now at Live New Orleans Poetry Festival, so he wasn't able to attend this episode. But Jonathan Penton founded Unlikely Stories in 1998. Since then, he's lent editorial and management assistance to many literary ventures such as Mad Hat, the New Orleans Poetry Festival, where he is now, as I said, Rigorous, and Big Bridge. In 2005, he founded Unlikely Books, which publishes 3 to 5 books of poetry a year. He's organized literary performances and performed himself across the United States. His own poetry books are Last Chap from Virgin Press, Blood and Salsa, and Painting Rust, Prosthetic Gods, and Standards of Sadity, and the free e-chapbook Backstories, which you can download from Argotist eBooks. And I do urge you to go and check out unlikelystories.com or .org, because they feature some amazing work, everything from political essays to shall we say experimental poetry, and based right out of New Orleans. So Cassandra, I'm sure you've got one of Jonathan.
Yes, I'm going to read one of Jonathan's pieces. I don't have his hat, but I can say all righty, but not in quite the same flourish that he does. So this is called Fleeing Hurricane Ida. 36 hours to landfall. The rural roads are empty, but Kapur black. Highways with a posted speed of 70 miles per hour turn sharply without warning. Each time I brake, you startle awake. The gas stations empty of fuel are closed, and we both have to pee. The cat cries steadily for 4 hours. The radio cuts out and around to various saccharine stations. The rural drivers, more accustomed to these low ways, zip past us with unnerving buzz. But this is not our first time on this trek. It will not be the last time we run away. We'll stay and run and stay until there's nothing to run from. So that one's from Jonathan.
Now we hear from Cassandra herself, who is an award-winning writer, scholar of prose poetry, and professor of writing and literature in Melbourne, Australia. Her most recent books of prose poetry are, and once again, Cassandra is a prose poet, are Raphaelite,
Don't judge me.
Leftovers, and Fugitive Letters. Cassandra is currently writing a book of prose poetry on the atomic bomb with funding from the Australia Council. Cassandra co-wrote prose poetry, an introduction in the anthology of Australian prose poetry. She is commissioning editor for Wesley magazine.
And I have been converting everyone to Holly Iglesias, who's here today, and one of my absolute favorite people in the world. And her boxing inside the box has been tantalizing people after I mentioned it in an interview with Nin. So grab a copy of that as well. It's fantastic. Today I'm going to read something really short. And it's after, this kind of sounds like I'm blowing my own trumpet, and I hate doing that, but I'm very excited because I got contacted that one of my prose poems was going to be used to study in high schools in Australia. So I thought I'd read that today. So it's called Faulkner, so you'll recognize it. My mother is a fish. I have buried her 3 times already, but the water table is high and she floats to the surface. I cleaned her using scissors to cut anteriorly through the bones attached to her pelvic fins, but I can't cross the water while her cloudy eyes are directed at the sky. The tackle box is full of the rusty hooks of untried catches. I take a pitted sinker and use the fishing line to weigh down her fleshy isthmus. There is water in my shoes, but I can feel the stones rise beneath my feet. So I would like to introduce the intrepid Mark Vincennes. He is an Anglo-Swiss American poet, a fiction writer, translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He's published 20 books of poetry, including more recently Einstein Fledermaus, The Little Book of Earthly Delights, A Brief Conversation with Consciousness, 39 Wonders and Other Management Issues, forthcoming from Spite and Dival. There Might Be a Moon or a Dog, which I can attest is brilliant, forthcoming from Life Before Man Gazebo in Australia, and The Pearl Diver of Irumani, forthcoming from White Pine Press. An album of music, ambience, and verse, Left Hand Clapping, is forthcoming from Tree Torn Records. Vincennes is also a prolific translator, and he's translated from, join me everyone, German, Romanian, and French. He's published 10 books of translations, most recently Unexpected Development by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist Klaus Mertz with White Pine, and which was a finalist for the 2016 Cliff Becker Book Prize in Translation. His translation of Klaus Mertz's selected poems, An Audible Blue, is forthcoming from White Pine Press very soon, I believe. He is currently working on a brilliant project, a novel entitled The Age of Occasions. Vincennes is editor and publisher of Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. He has, this is our favorite bit, come on everyone, he has lived all over the world, from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born in Matilda Hospital on the Peak in Hong Kong, but he now lives on a farm in rural Western Massachusetts, overlooking, yep, Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain, where there are more, I pause for dramatic effect, banded hair streaks, spice bush swallowtails, and silver spotted skippers than people. So there's a lot of alliterative things out there, Mark.
Well, you know, caterpillars are quite alliterative, as you know. This is a prose poem from a collection I've been working on called Coalition Number 9. Little oeuvre, little token, little tree. We were flush that month. The fish had returned to the fishermen, and Trudy made fish cakes and fish pies for the laborers at the docks. We ate mackerel, sole, and haddock that month, and we had lemons. Thousands of lemons arrived in containers from warmed climes, carrying not only lemons, but spiders, insects, rodents, and bats. The giant fruit bats had slept all the way from the Philippines, and when the containers were unloaded, they were all set free into the ash and soot and coal dust. A mouse is a mouse, you say. Not so. Imagine the flat flesh mice with their giant incisors and furless chests. What scores of fleas have crisscrossed the ocean with them? Theirs are eyes that defeated empires. They ran amok and made their new homes in the trees, in the gutters, along the boardwalks, in the flower pots and empty barbecues, all along the railroad, and then struck out into the last remaining forests to fight the fox and the toad. And when the population settled, here it spread across the valleys and the plains of this great nation where more can be taken with a little, where fireflies live and die in the oceans of the meadows. Yes, we were flush that month, and we savored it. And now comes our feature for today, which is a celebration of 50 years of Ploughshares Poetry. It's quite an achievement, and particularly this winter 2021 issue. And I'm going to first introduce one of the founders of Ploughshares, DeWitt Henry, whose books include The Marriage of Anna Mae Motts, winner of the Peter Taylor Prize for the novel, a trilogy and memoir concluding with Endings and Beginnings, family essays from Mad Hat, which was longlisted for the PEN Diamondstein Spielvogel Award for the Art of Essay, and a collection of notes and essays, Sweet Marjoram, Mad Hat also. He also edited several anthologies, including Fathering Daughters and Sorrow's Company, both from Beacon Press. His first chapbook, Foundlings, will be published by Life After Man Gazebo Books in September, and his first poetry collection, Restless for Words, poems, later this fall by Finishing Line Press. His work on Ploughshares was recognized by one of the first Massachusetts Commonwealth Awards in the arts, humanities, and Interpretive Sciences in 1993. He's also received the 3rd Annual Editor's Book Award from Pushcart Press and a Creative Writing Fellowship from the NEA. He is Professor Emeritus at Emerson College and serves as contributing editor to both Woven Tale Press and Solstice magazines. More details are at www.dewithenryoneWord.com. Welcome, DeWitt.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Lit Balm, for the feature. Let me start with my poem. On leaves, tree, fig, and table. 1, tree. Each fall, we anticipate peak foliage, drive north to take in blazing hills before the change spreads south. Towards Halloween, scattered browns, reds, and yellows fill our yards, and we rake and blow them into waist-high piles. Years ago, after kids had fun jumping, residents burned their leaf piles and tagged the air. Now we pile armfuls into biodegradable yard bags and put them out for town collection. Each tree sheds until it's bare. The last leaf drops. Dormant and skeletal, give or take squirrel nests. The limbs and branches bend with snow and ice, sway in winds, and sometimes snap. But then the sun's arc rises, days lengthen, ground thaws, first buds appear on branches. We see the tint of green, and then full leaves and blossoms. It's pollen season, spring welcome, Allergen's not. Each tree fills out, a photosynthesis factory, thick canopies of shade. Birds sing in the reaches, squirrels chase. Layer on layer, separate branch clusters are enlivened. They dance and shimmer, whisper and whoosh, have voices. Look up, see greens glow. Look down, see patches and shadows keep time on the ground. 2, fig. According to Genesis 1:3, Adam and Eve sewed together fig leaves and made aprons for themselves, not for camouflage, style, or warmth, but for shame, particularly of genitals. They'd lost their blissful ignorance and realized that the obvious way their bodies differed from their creators was in their reproductive organs. Or so it seems to me, whose 4th grade class was told to draw the outline of a human body. Puzzled by what our teacher expected, I never finished mine, left its crotch blank. Masaccio, in his 1420s fresco, The Expulsion, painted Adam and Eve, once free and perfect as pagan gods, now driven out by an archangel with sword. Adam hides his face in both hands, penis exposed, while Eve weeps and covers breasts with her right hand, pudendum with left. Sometime later, a censor added fig leaves for both loins. For Stephen Greenblatt, Masaccio's Eve evokes the naked women in those infinitely cruel photographs taken by the Nazis. The fall of man, exit east of Eden, aware of good and evil, but not yet of loss, not of frailty, mortality, pain and childbirth, predator and prey, war, or season cycles, and not of dreams either, of love, growth, mercy, or redemption. 3, table. Our formal dinner table, inherited from my mother, normally seats 6, but also can be extended to 8 or 10 thanks to 2 extra leaves. We release a lever underneath and pull the ends apart, slide in each leaf, then close and lock. It's all mahogany veneer with only 6 matching chairs, so we added kitchen chairs. Occasions for full leaves are rare since our children left. Shortened, the table collects household clutter, and our habit is to eat plates and laps in front of our TV. But when we gather for holiday visits, we're packed as close as an overbooked flight. I'm at the foot and Connie the head, having brought in turkey, roast, or ham and other hot dishes. Our children on both sides, along with their partners and children. Ruth at 9 and 16, David's with Booster at 1. Sometimes a guest, sometimes my ghosts, my parents, sister, and brothers, my missing friends, Connie's absent loved ones. We pass dishes, eat, shout, laugh, make toasts. Our seasons turn. As do plowshare seasons. Since 1971, over 3 generations. Before I introduce John Skoyles, our dedicated poetry editor, 15 years and counting, I need to celebrate the contributions of David Daniel in our second generation, who expanded our poetry network nationally and internationally, and those of Joyce Pesaroff, our first managing editor and poetry editor, who helped cultivate the larger New England community and edited our best of anthology, The Ploughshares Poetry Reader, in 1986. As our current website states, we began in the Plough and the Stars, an Irish pub in Cambridge, Massachusetts, named for Sean O'Casey's influential play, The Plough and the Stars, about the liberation of Ireland. In the early 1970s, the pub hosted a handful of regulars who started their own small revolution. Their central concern was that the work of a new generation of writers, representative of a seismic shift in the culture at that time, was going unnoticed by traditional publishing. To address the problem, they decided to publish a journal that would extend their discussions about contemporary literature beyond the walls of their favorite haunt. The history of Ploughshares, then, is not only one of critical inquiry, but also one of active reform. The current staff of Ploughshares, led by Lit Randolph, holds dear the history of our founding, and we pledge to uphold our founding mission of publishing exceptional work by emerging and established writers that pushes the boundaries of what is possible in art. We will continue to publish writers who might otherwise be marginalized or outright excluded. We promise to continue our work of recognizing and supporting the unique ways writers respond to and reflect significant changes in culture. More than ever, we need our writers to help us understand the world. One source of Ploughshares' longevity and liveliness has remained its guest editor system, which grew from the belief that poets themselves should select poets. The poetry editor helps to choose and enlist future guest editors while maintaining standards in processing unsolicited submissions. If the past is prologue, may Ploughshares prove to be a never-ending story. On that note, I'm pleased to turn the program over to John Skoyles, who has published 7 books of poems and 5 of prose. Poetry, A Little Faith, Permanent Change, Definition of the Soul, The Situation, Inside Job, Suddenly It's Evening, Selected Poems, and Yes and No, all with Carnegie Mellon University Press. Prose, Generous Strangers, a collection of personal essays, a memoir, Secret Frequencies, a New York Education, an autobiographical novel, A Movable Famine, A Life in Poetry, The Nut File, a fiction, nonfiction hybrid, and Driven, a memoir and travelogue form published by Mad Hat Press. He has taught at Southern Methodist University, Sarah Lawrence College, Warren Wilson, where he directed the MFA program, and Emerson College. He has also twice served as executive director for the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. His work has appeared in the New Yorker, the New York Times, Poetry, the Paris Review, the American Poetry Review, the Atlantic, Harvard Review, Slate, and the Yale Review, among others. His awards include 2 grants from the NEA, as well as fellowships from the New York and North Carolina Arts Councils. He became a member of the Order of the Occult Hand while reviewing books for the Associated Press. He is the poetry editor of Ploughshares and a member of the writing committee at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. His website is https://johnskoyles.org. Have you a poem for us, John?
Thank you very much, Dee, for the introduction, and thanks to Mark, Cassandra, and Jonathan for providing us this forum for Ploughshares. Yes, I'm going to read a very short love poem, and then I'm going to introduce the four poets for tonight. This poem is called "The Heart Has Reasons." The heart has reasons, and I wrote those reasons on the ruled grid of an index card to preserve the moment, madam, when the panels of the hotel elevator closed, leaving just us. A sigh and a kiss did nicely, lady, but when the doors opened again, you were again nowhere near. And now the file card's lost too, with its logical numerical slate. I've misplaced this and that over the years, dear, but the things I miss most, miss, are listed on that card. Now it's my pleasure to introduce these four poets from the Ploughshares winter issue. Kwame Dawes, Rebecca Foust, Tatiana Johnson-Boria, and John Okrent, who will read in that order. Each brings something special and different to the issue. The first reader is Kwame Dawes, the author of 22 books of poetry and numerous books of fiction and criticism. He's the editor-in-chief of Prairie Schooner and the George Holmes University professor at the University of Nebraska. He directs the African Poetry Book Fund and is artistic director of the Calabash International Literary Festival. He is also a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, and the editor of American Life in Poetry. Please welcome Kwame Dawes.
I'm not seeing Kwame
No,
anywhere.
I'm not seeing Kwame. I've looked on the list unless Kwame's under a different name. Kwame, shake your hands all about if you're here.
No, I don't think Kwame's here.
Oh, well,
Well, then,
Becky, are you ready to take on the first slot? It's Rebecca Foust. We'll go to her. The author of seven books, including The Unexploded Ordnance Bin and Paradise Drive. In October, Four-Way Books will publish her new book, Only. She's the recipient of the 2020 Pablo Neruda Prize for Poetry, the C.P. Cavafy and James Hurst Poetry Prizes, a Marin County Poet Laureateship, and fellowships from Hedgebrook, McDowell, and the Swanee Writers Conference. Becky is the poetry editor for Women's Voices for Change and an assistant editor at Narrative Magazine. Please welcome Rebecca Foust.
Thank you, John, and thank you to Ploughshares for publishing the poem I'm about to read. It's a real honor for me to appear in these pages with poets like Kwame, John, Tatiana, and others. And thank you, Lit Balm, for sponsoring this reading. It's a reading series I'm really happy to know about now, and I'll be following you. So I'll start with my poem from this issue, and it's called Because. It was in spite or because of the rain. It was because of the hot summer night, heavy and wet, like insulation left out in unwrapped stacks at the cottage all season. It was because it was too hot to breathe, and the lake was the only relief. It was because our clothes were weighted, even our bodies without the clothes. It was because we were bored or in love with others or bored with being in love. It was because the air went still like inside a silo. Pollen motes hung in suspension and dusting the water with gold. It was because kingfishers mate for life, and there were 2 in the cove that year. It was because we saw a bald eagle spreading its wings like a kept promise we'd hedged against. It was our blood, disobedient and zinging, a hot, high fiddle lament, or because we were alone. It was because we were alone at the cottage, never finished, on a lake, on a night when the air could be drunk, and we were drunk too. It was because the wind caressed us, soft and fat in our hair. It was because all we could hear were birds and bullfrogs. It was because our hands were blistered, not calloused, and the blisters swelled. It was because the dying sun shimmered sequins on water that bounced back to illuminate only the old brick fireplace in the dark cabin for 10 minutes, steeping the world in the sepia of another time. It was because it was too hot to do anything but sit on the old dock, too hot to move until thunder boomed back from the limestone cliffs lining the lake edge, and the sky opened finally to pour out its relief. It was because of the rain. So the next, I'm just going to read a couple other poems, and these are from my new book only, coming out with 4-Way Books on September 15th. That is, if they can find the paper. I gather there's a big paper shortage in publishing now, and we're being warned about all kinds of things like, don't expect all the print runs to look the same. But anyway, here's to hoping it'll be out then, and these next few poems are from that book. Election Returns 2016. The way up the mountain was like always, switchbacks and more switchbacks. The trail rising through redwoods arced over a silence rinsed with new rain. We were in an emerald world of fern and mist and moss trembled with tiny glass beads. It was dusk and late fall. We knew what would happen. We'd be made to suffer for a few hours before reaching the summit, then would emerge above the fog. Yes, there were portents, maple leaves pasting the trail with bloody handprints, evergreens brittle and brown, a few manzanita oddly in bloom, lake water like pewter, faint reek of smoke we hoped came from a controlled burn. We went on walking the trail by memory, a memory that also held rain after drought and wild iris massed like stars. We walked till we came upon what was left of the deer, a white basket of rib cage that looked almost human, matted fur, tags of torn flesh. On the way down, it would all become clear. But even then, we understood. It was a fresh kill, and the cougar was close. We looked around to see who among us was prey, and we understood then what would happen. And here's one of the things that did happen. And this next poem is dedicated to my friend and student, former student, Javier Zamora. Sit with me. Sit again with me by the fire to debate the placement of commas and italics and the meanings of words as if the world were at stake in this warm, bright room, secured by a heavy door with a good lock on a street, in a block. No ICE agent would dare wield his baton. And that for a moment, what matters is nothing more than words on this page. Here in this room, we believe in choosing the right words in the right order, and that it makes a difference, whether craven means crass or something more odious, like openly indifferent to suffering. Even if both happen to apply, only one is precisely correct. And we believe that matters. After the election, a woman on the bus cried out while checking her phone.
Mr. Dawes, it's DeWitt Henry from Ploughshares.
Thank God, she said.
Event is going on.
The bees are no longer going extinct. They've been taken off the endangered list. It was not long after that the EPA was shut down and the word criminal amended to mean children who escape into this country from earthquakes, machetes, and guns. So many children crossing those rivers. And last night, workers taken right out of the kitchen at Cavallo Point. But here in my neighborhood, the magnolias are unfolding large, creamy blooms with an abandon that brings to mind the words wanton and craven. Sit with me again and remind me words matter as much as the world. Remind me craven means not crass, but cowardly, even if both happen to apply to our president. And evil and immoral are almost always over the top in a poem. Tell me what each term means and does not mean, and what this particular 4-year term means to the father who worked here for 20 years and now must leave his family behind. And tell me how to parse a sentence that balances weeping with silence, children with criminal and abandon, and president with craven and crass and openly indifferent to suffering, immoral and evil. Give me any meaning that makes sense and will not allow the reader to choose or to turn away. So I'm going to turn away from politics and to literature now. The next poem, The Dream of the Rood, was inspired by a medieval poem of that name written by an anonymous poet. It happens to be the first piece of literature I ever read critically. It was in Freshman English 101 when I was at Smith College. And the poem is about a wanderer who comes upon the true cross called a rood, R-O-O-D in the poem. And that word has a lot of homonyms, it turns out. And that was a good thing for this poem, which is in the form of a villanelle. Dream of the rood. On me, the wounds are seen. That's from the medieval poem. Dream of the rood. You should follow your dream, whispered the rude young yoga instructor, earnest and bent on proving that pain could, at its heart, be good, and that I ached for more than this hardwood floor against my spine's misalignment. I'd signed up to follow it, my dream, but now I rued the day I'd moved to this crazy state, loaded with cord stack, the family tree felled by blood, smoke, and gin. Mom and Dad died years before they each died. Light was divided from light in every small pain, so I went west. Burnt was the dream shape of home, root, shaft, and crossbeam. In my first year of dead and no weather, I wanted winter. I pined for trees with no leaves and for any word spoken in tongues. Stand, she said, on your head, and it began to rain. Outside, upside down, a tree bled. I dreamt blurred redbud, the rood, pain-pierced light, a dead tree in luminous bloom. And I'll close with the title poem of my new book, Only. Oh, love, this happened, or it did not. In a room with green walls, my son was born. His cord was torn too soon, so they cut off his head to save his heart. He lived for a long time. For a long time, there was no breath or cry. When finally he spoke the wide, whorled leaves of corn. He spoke the crickets in clusters beneath the sheaves. He sang the soil in. He sang the wind in the dune and the hush of ebb tide. Some say he died. Some say he died. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky. Very powerful. Look forward to your new book. Our next reader is Tatiana Johnson-Boria, who's a writer, artist, and educator. Her writing explores identity, trauma, especially inherited trauma, and what it means to heal. In 2021, she was a McDowell Fellow, a Brother Thomas Fellow, and a Tin House Scholar. She has an MFA from Emerson College and serves on the board for VITA, Women in Literary Arts. Her work can be found in the Kenyon Review, Pleiades, among others. Her first book, Nocturne in Joy, will be released in January 2023. Please welcome Tatiana.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, John, for that introduction. It's really lovely to be here with you all. Can everyone hear me? I just want to make sure. I've been told I speak very low, so I want to make sure everyone can hear. Okay, I'm just going to read a few poems, and I will start with one called Ars Poetica. A walk through a field carrying my mother's wounds, the glorious gap in my grandmother's teeth, the iron swallowing the wrinkles from my sister's dress. My stubborn brothers throw their heads back in laughter. I marvel the harvest of their uncombed kinks. A phantom of a father, the tremor of his voice. My mother's silent exorcist on a good day. The roaches praising, the empty of the night. The oven open, its yawn devours the brittle cold. Winter unyielding, it wills to break. My grandmother and her children, squatters in an empty brownstone. The passing down of how to thaw, the absence of money. We do not count the lessons of growing up without. Instead, my great aunt remembers her mother, a master of bearing joy while cleaning others' homes. How ample humility runs in the caretaker. When she is forced to forget everything, I watch her in a facility, the quiet blink of her eyes, a drowning past she's unable to tell me. When she dies, I visit her home. The land expands, a restless fruit. She is buried next to her husband, who is buried next to her daughter, who is buried next to her son, who is not buried next to his nephew, who dies. Many years later, in utter silence, a memory revives an ancestor who unearths itself to marvel the vast, infertile, infinite. Okay, this next poem is, I was working in a middle school in Boston, where I'm from, and I wanted to read it because John Skoyles really helped me shape this one. So it's called After Autumn for the girls at Orchard Gardens Middle School. It is too late at the orchard, for the fruit have already fallen, bruised juice stilted on the inside. A girl tells me she has never heard a poem about a Black girl, but has heard poems about apples. I try to sketch her as fruit, red, shining optimism of being alive. How pure it is to be deathless. 12-year-olds laugh filled with glitter, like Jahi's nails who look like Cardi's, 10 bejeweled mosaic stems, rooted in a Black Oakland girl, thought to be dead, sweet sparkling from her cornrows to the tip of her enduring fingers. It is Ruby who reminds me at a young age of how it rarely matters how small, unassuming it is to walk to school. The world will crush your belonging. Like Nia's cheeks, glimmering gold once dew-soaked, her body fallen into the earth, gone from safety's branch, a thing someone thought to slice. This orchard, this fruit, a glorious ebbing, from voice to movement, born through Sandy speaking her life into fruition. How weary it is to have arrived, this forgotten harvest, visions of the apples, breathing before a fall. Okay, this next poem is called Here We Are in Infinite Joy, and it starts with an epigraph. People dance to say, I am alive and in my body. I am Black, alive, and looking back at you. Elizabeth Alexander. Here's the skin, the sun glares its radiant teeth towards. Here are the hips, mesmerized in rhythm, weighted blues, holy strut, beautiful as ever. Here they are, having cried through some wrecking calm or chaos. Here they are dancing, for how could they not? Here's how a song emits the limbs to swing. Are these words happy or sad? Does it matter? If the song is a rich croon in the body, the knees arch, weathered joints alive with motion, the bass an arsenal for euphoric convulsing. Here they are, stunning celebration. How we move, cadent glory. It is never too much, never too much. Okay, so the last poem I'll read is from the Ploughshares issue, and just want to say it's a dream to be published in Ploughshares, and especially on this mark of 50 years. So I'm just very grateful for the editors and yeah, to just be alongside all these other wonderful writers. So this poem is called My Mother and I Loiter. My mother and I loiter on the front steps of some young professional's apartment in Boston. She smokes, I hold my breath. It is hard for both of us to breathe. Her, heavy doses of meds, me, small doses of meds, meant to make seeing her less painful, other things less crushing. Today it is hot. She tries to blow her cigarette smoke away from me. She doesn't know much about me anymore, but she knows I've always hated the smoke. She knows I've always hated how we've never been able to connect. She used to roll my infant body in a stroller while she fumbled through schizophrenia. I knew nothing but how to love her the way babies know. The way babies don't know, but they are experiencing pain, but that something is breaking. And my mother is a hurting thing, but like a baby, she doesn't know this. So I sing to her about my job, how the family is doing. This calms her all the time. I imagine she feels no pain, if only for a moment. And I can smile as I wonder if this is how it feels to be a mother, to know the world and all its evil and to soothe anyway, even when the consoling never comes back and you're left empty. I can't pretend to know about birthing, but I know how to make up happy stories for a woman on a front stoop who can't believe her daughter is almost 30, who can't believe she had a baby once, chanting back every lullaby, meant to make things okay, meant to shield everything soft, like we are told only mothers could. I don't know how to be a mother, but somehow I have learned to keep every hard lesson tucked away until enough time has passed, until the world has aged us both, old enough to learn. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. I'm glad you read that last poem. That's always been dear to me, that one. Thank you very much. The last reader is John Okrent, a poet and family doctor. His poetry has appeared in Field, Poetry Northwest, the Seattle Times, Plume, Sixth Inch, and elsewhere. His first book of poetry, This Costly Season, will be published on May 14th by Arrowsmith Press. He's a medical director of a community health center in Tacoma, Washington, where he lives with his wife and 2 young children in a fisherman's cabin built on stilts. Please welcome John Okrent.
Thanks, John. Can everybody hear me okay? Well, thank you, Tatiana and Rebecca. Those are beautiful readings, and thank you for inviting me to this, John and DeWitt. Thank you so much. I'm going to read from my new book, This Costly Season, and I thought I would just start. So it's a crown of sonnets that I wrote between March and September of 2020, in the beginning of the pandemic, and I thought I would just start as close to today's date as I could. I'll just read 5 of them. So April 20th, 2020. That time of year when every crow you see carries clump of hair or twig or tuft of down into the trees. They brood and hover over our duress while spring repays last summer's debts. We shall afford our costly seasons, said Snodgrass, but this one? Like a stain, desperation seeps into things. The grocery bag, the steering wheel, little hand in my hand, midnight bowl of cereal. Before leaving for clinic, I toss my daughter high and higher into the faultless air, like any father. Later, with soap and water, I'll wash the formless fruits of my labor. The mist hangs low around the whole horizon, like the lid of an eye that's closing, but it's only morning. April 23rd, 2020. It's only morning, but I am ready for bed, for dinner, a drink, the dark horizon pearled with lit rooms. I admit it, I've grown used to being alive, and I'm tired already of this poem, of the I in it. In the parking lot in her yellow gown, Anna reaches a swab through the window of a car and up the driver's nose until he gags. Beyond this, brown birds on municipal wires, chartreuse of spring on the trees, trash bags in the alleys, American flags sagging from the eaves. It's a summer flag, if ever there was one, which reminds me, summer will come, despite us. I bow my head to the gun of the infrared thermometer, then enter the clinic. April 27th, 2020. I enter the clinic and come closer to others than most others can come these furrowed days, days at once so full of distance and congestion, a person could choke on air, and people do. Cerulean blue and rococo clouds above the I-5 corridor, the largesse of the here and now. Small comforts stretch to compensate our largest fear. Purell dispensers on the plastered walls, like primitive masks with tragic frowns. Squirt, squirt. I can feel that something hurts, but don't know how, or even in whose body. Wild poppies on the side of the road, like tiny monks in their saffron robes. From a distance, I thought the fire hydrant was a crucifix and marked a grave. How many ways can a man be saved? April 30th, 2020. 2 blocks from clinic, every morning, to be saved, I pass the same cloister of chain link and small trees, whose blossoms take a deeper shade of fuchsia by the day. A woman always lets her dogs out then. She smokes and leans in her robe. Her shower cap is the same fuchsia as the blossoms. Her chihuahua crouches to shit and she leaves it. The light turns and I roll on. The earth holds almost all we think is gone. When Ula laughs in her sleep, I wonder, what are dreams to one so newly here? These evenings on our walks, I press her nose to lilacs and exaggerate delight, as if, breathing thus, we might transcend. We are made of breathing, and breathing ends, but we are also made of dust, which doesn't. The air is warm tonight and barely there, like a memory of being touched. Life isn't fair, it's beautiful. Okay, and this is the last one I'll read, May 5th, 2020. It is beautiful to be glad to see a person every time you see them, as I was to see Juan, the maintenance man with whom it was always the same brotherly greeting, each of us thumping a fist over his heart and grinning as though we shared a joke or bread. I barely knew him. Evenings in clinic, me finishing my work, him beginning his. Fluorescence softening in the early dark. He wasn't even 50, had 4 grandchildren, fixed what was broken, cleaned for us, caught the virus, and died on his couch last weekend. And what right have I to write this poem, who will not see him in his uniform of ashes, only remember him in his Seahawks cap and far from sick, locking up after me, turning up his music. Thank you.
Thank you, John, very much for that perspective from a medical provider and with such formal command. As I've had the privilege of reading the book before it came out, and it's a wonder. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, John and DeWitt. DeWitt, would you unmic yourself? Ask to unmic or unmute.
Got it.
For a second.
Okay.
Yeah, so tell us briefly, DeWitt, how did Ploughshares come about in the first place?
I think we covered that.
Did we?
The art necessities is strange. It's just.
Did we get into the axle grease and all that sort of thing?
There should be a short way to say this. In 1971, actually in 1970, being in an Irish pub in Cambridge as a graduate student, I ran into a lot of other writers who had been at the University of Iowa and other sheltered places, the Bowery, Berkeley, and so forth, coming to the crossroads in that shadow of the Vietnam War. And we were all griping about being emerging or being young or simply being ambitious and being totally shut out by what we thought of as a generation gap, but also an economic gap, that people that were paid for publishing somehow, i.e. Houghton Mifflin and the Atlantic Monthly, equaled the literary establishment of Boston, and they were not interested in new voices. So in the Irish tradition, actually, of W.B. Yeats, Peter O'Malley, one of the owners of the Plough and the Stars bar where we were, said, "Why don't start a magazine?" And some of these maverick people like George Kimball said, "Oh, I've always done, I've done 3 magazines. I ran for sheriff of Kansas City and I was in Iowa, blah, 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 blah." So all of these troubadours of the day had some experience with literary magazines. And so they decided to join forces to find an audience in the style of the new journalism that was being sold on the streets. And collectively find a common reader, which we all believed in, who would be welcoming and hungry enough to entertain different aesthetics, or poets coming from different tribes and different aesthetics. And probably the most remarkable thing about our day, as opposed to modernism and postmodernism and so forth, was the diversity of directions. We hear of New Directions magazine. This was all directions. And so we managed to gather that energy into a collectivism. And that's also the origin of the revolving editorship. You can't join forces with a literary NATO we're plowshares. I'm sorry, it's the wrong metaphor. We were beating our swords of violence, I guess, into creativity. So it started, and it got grants, and then it started to attract favorites of the original group, and sort of like a growing weed garden. It gathered momentum and order and a tradition of surprise and quality that insisted on one thing, which was to be worthy of the previous issue and to challenge one.
And was Ploughshares always affiliated with Emerson? Yeah.
No, that didn't happen until 1987, I think.
And so prior to that, it was just an indie journal, or?
It was a 501c3, hard fought to get the IRS to understand so we could get larger grants, that we were not a commercial magazine, we were a literary magazine. And I put a lot of energy into trying to get the bureaucracies of the official world to understand what a literary magazine was.
Could I raise a point?
Sure, sure.
I think the magazine attracted a lot of attention, and DeWitt is modest about this. But DeWitt, could you, because you discovered people earlier in their careers who went on to great celebrity, could you name them? That's what really, I think, established the magazine as something to watch. Would you do that?
Sure. Probably Thomas Lux had just had his first book published by a man named Jim Randall, who was a professor at Emerson. And he was the first poet with a book to guest edit, if you will, in the first volume. He was followed by the first woman, which was Fannie Howe. We also had David Gillette, who was teaching at Simmons at the time, knew Lloyd Schwartz, and Lloyd Schwartz knew Frank Bedard. And after Gillette edited an issue, volume 2, number 3, Frank Bedard, Lloyd Schwartz, and Robert Pinsky. Frank at that time had one book, I think. Pinsky had one book. I'm not sure Lloyd did or not. But they edited a remarkable issue that featured Robert Lowell. Well, I've written about this. If you can go to my website, there's a roll call. But later on, there were also advanced career poets, very, very well known, obviously Robert Lowell, but Elizabeth Bishop, Richard Wilbur, who joined in out of generosity, gave his poems. I guess the first issue, O'Malley had a poem from Ezra Pound that mythologically was lost somewhere in the White Horse Bar when he was drinking. That is O'Malley, not Pound. But these other writers, there's a word, noumena, which means spiritual community, and the noumena spread, and the integrity spread. That these weren't people that were desperate. They were people who cared about a literary community and an audience that did not exist, but we believe should exist. And I think that the magazine collectively, not just for poetry, but for prose and later on for memoir and all different kinds of writing, helped to create a large literary community and help to along with the backing of the National Endowment for the Arts, to educate people about what a literary mission and what a literary magazine was. And times have changed. We're in a third generation, not a first. But I think that the situation of the 1970s is no longer the situation. There are so many good magazines and outlets, such as Narrative, that it's unlikely that a talented writer will feel shut out the way we all did, like sad hearts at a supermarket peering in at the apples.
And John, what about you? When did you start with being poetry editor of Ploughshares?
I was appointed by DeWitt because Don Lee, 15 years ago, left for a teaching post, and DeWitt was made editor, if I'm right, DeWitt, by the president of Emerson, and you appointed Margot Livesey as fiction editor and asked me to be poetry editor. I can't believe it's that long. It did not seem, I didn't realize it was that long. So that's how that happened. I'm very, I'm so happy to do it because it keeps me in touch with the young readers we have. Probably the oldest one might be 33 years old, that when the poems come into the magazine, they're screened by a whole group of senior readers and junior readers, and they point things out to me that I would not have seen before. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And as DeWitt pointed out, if you look at any table of contents, there is a great range of aesthetics, ages, and periods of accomplishment. There are old timers in there with people who've sometimes, often a first publication too.
Yeah. And so how many years has it been exactly, John?
For me?
Yeah.
15.
15 years.
Yeah.
And have you seen a big arc of change?
Yes.
In that 15 years? Tell us about it.
Absolutely. Well, the change of that is parallel to the change in American poetry, when, you know, I could go back further than 15 years. Say in the 60s, the 50s, there were probably 12 poets. It's like I heard David Brenner, the comedian, saying, you know, when you wanted to be a comedian, there were 12 comedians who would, Jack Benny, and the other ones would say, oh, you want to be a comedian, kid? Let me show you. And there were not that many poets, and they were all familiar names and familiar backgrounds. That's changed enormously, not only with the rise of the MFA programs and the democratization of poetry and literature, but the diversification of it, especially in the last 10 years, has opened it up widely, internationally, and I think brought a great deal of spirit and perspective that's entirely different from what it was.
I mean, how many small presses are there in the United States, you know, alone? Probably, I don't know, who publish, shall we say, quote unquote, serious poetry? Probably 2,000 presses, I would say,
Yes.
something like that.
Yes, that's a good point. Yes.
And there are many of those small presses that publish amazing books.
They They do. And, you know, I was at part of a discussion with one foundation who said that if you published the book, you would be ineligible for the grant. And I said, do you know who hasn't published the book? I mean, it used to be, there were those 6 presses and that would be it, right? And then there was a university press, and maybe you heard about 2 small presses. And now, beautiful presses, beautiful work, tantalizing work. But, you know, the establishment's still far behind, I think. Look at the New York Times Book Review and you look at these places. You can look at the New Yorker when you look at Books in Brief. Just look at what houses publish those. They're always the New York houses, right? They're yet to catch up.
Yeah, of course, of course. So many distractions in New York City, you know. Anyway, thank you so much, DeWitt and John, for hosting this wonderful reading, 50 Years of Ploughshares Poetry, a celebration of the last issue of Ploughshares Winter 21-22, which featuring Rebecca Foust, Tatiana Johnson-Boria, John Okrent, Kwame Dawes, who unfortunately couldn't make it. And once again, so many thanks to John Skoyles and DeWitt Henry for hosting this wonderful reading. Let me tell you what's coming up. Next Saturday, we have Forrest Gander, Joe Safdie, Aliki Barnstone, and Liliana Scarelou, who is a Greek poet who Aliki has translated. On the weekend of May 7 and 8, we have the Tupelo Books Weekend, which includes the poets Chloe Honum, Corey Van Lingdom, Maggie Queenie, Michael Haidt, and together with Cutter Streetby, Cindy Savitt, and Tyler Mills. And the next day we have Sean Singer, Ileana Rocca, Lawrence Rabb, and Nicholas Rigacourt. So please join us for that. And we have lots of exciting things coming up. But right now, I'm gonna hand you back over to Cassandra, who's going to do the open mic portion of the show.
Yeah, Ploughshares smashed it out of the park. That was fantastic. What a brilliant reading and discussion. So yeah, thanks again, all the readers, and to amazing Dee and John, who I haven't seen for ages, but feel like I've reignited my friendship with him by watching him today. So that's been fantastic. Our first reader for open mic, and it's going to be fabulous, is Leslie. And I love Leslie's poem, so I'm excited that she's here to read one for us. Leslie, can you
Thank you, Cassandra. And yeah, thank Barbara and Tatiana and John Okrent for your readings. They were great. And of course, DeWitt for 50 Years of Ploughshares, and Lit Balm for all these nights. So thank you very much. This is called Exodus Influx, Ukraine and Afghanistan and Ethiopia, Yemen, and the whole community was called. 1, and told, send not to find for whom, not another, not other, but the one. We are all assembly, gathered, a congregation, our family. 2, recall what it took, what it takes to build from ancient times by bricks, a civilization, a structure, a phylum, a bird, a flight, a flock, a colony, a murder, a company. 3, by what sort of mind do we cull blocks of brightest vermilion pine lily, curved blossom dying, winged damselflies, brown big-eared bats, a rainforest in Brazil? Call them back before it is too. 4, recall, revive, destruction, destruction, yet, and for all that, singers now on the barricades, underground, have turned to reporting. They call out the war to make sure we hear. So we still sing our names, even now call their names. 5, know every name a quilt of every aged, every disabled person who cannot run, the baby dead before she can slide out of her dead mother's womb in the cratered hospital. Sing the women building a school for girls on pain of death. The man who clutches his child in a death grip as he races for the last plane out and hopes to find 6, singing the name of that which transports and gives lives beyond any possible imagination, not above, not deep down, but unspeakable. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. A flight, a flock, a colony, a murder. That was my favorite bit. Really moving, really stirring. Thank you so much. The next person on open mic is a very, very fond kind of person to introduce. It's John Wombat Wessick. And if we could all see the world through John's eyes, I think it would be a surreal and brilliant experience. So I'm sure he's got something wonderful for us today. John.
Hi, thank you. Recently, Ted Kooser did some poem posted on Facebook where he talked about animal crackers, and it got me thinking, well, shouldn't there also be invasive species crackers? And it's a prose poem.
Yes.
After arriving in a freighter's ballast, they crowd ginger snaps and animal crackers off grocery store shelves. Burmese python cookies drop from tree limbs onto elfin bakers and swallow them whole. Killer bees send the cost of honey through the ozone layer. High fructose corn syrup could substitute if kudzu didn't demand protection money, because it would be a shame if Iowa caught fire. On opening the box, an Asian carp slap to the face leaves the consumer too stunned to capture the fugitive cookie before it high dives off the balcony into the storm sewer to share its mutant DNA with goldfish crackers and abandoned pet alligators. Zebra mussels clog the water filter. Sea lampreys suck the life out of oranges and kiwis in the fruit bowl. Lionfish prowl the pantry, eating, consuming all-purpose flour, kosher salt, chocolate bars, pasta, baking powder, and anything not protected by steel.
It was magnificent. I'm never going to be able to eat a cookie without like regretting that it's not a Burmese python cookie. What a fantastic prose poem. I love it. Thank you so much. Linda is next. The fabulous Linda, who I think still lives down the road from Mark. I hope she does.
Oh, probably 5 miles. Cheshire's got a lot of real estate in it.
Excellent.
Lots of caterpillars as well, right?
Yes. And by the way, Mark, did you know that coyotes do not like sirens? When the sirens go over Route 8, the coyotes will howl along with them if it happens at night. Yeah. I don't know if you can hear it from up where you are, but anyway.
I can. I hear the coyotes going crazy at 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah.
I know it. They keep you up. Anyway, comparing the wildlife of Western Mass. Okay, so the name of the poem is We Exist for This Dance, and it's a bit upbeat. So I'm kind of glad to read something a little upbeat. Okay, you've listened long enough. Go. Run and think for all those who do not know how. I am rejoicing knowing that you will think not so much about our conversations, but how your conscious mind is beautiful. A ballerina, a soldier, a toolmaker, a cook. They all have to think. All can go bad if they falter, or all can go especially well if they think. I'm listening now to my skin, my gut, my limbs. They speak to me like your conscious will. Speak about doing well, spreading kindness, when so many others are infirm, bless them. Enthusiasm gets the attention of minions. Yes, and I, the enthusiast, love that we talked. You listened and all goes well, like a well-tuned piano, violin, classical guitar. Sing, then act upon your instincts in glorious fashion. Through the music of life, like a backdrop to romance. Tender keys and strings relish life. Their existence depends on the quality of the performance. Love, a heart. A heart alone is just an organ. Yet a heart overflowing with love is divinity. There's always risk. Love is worthwhile to a fault. So much these days is faulty. Many more things besides love. Love is a song of life, no matter. And I am the enthusiast, and I am enthusiastic that you think so. We exist for this dance, concerto, opera, and we mourn for those who cannot breathe it all in. Thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic. What an amazing ending. I love how your conscious mind is beautiful. What a fantastic piece. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, and
Next.
thank you for Lit Balm and Ploughshares and all the readers.
It's pretty sensational today. It is absolutely. And Ralph Culver is going to keep the sensationalism going.
Well, thank you, Cassandra. Can people hear me okay?
Yep.
What an amazing evening of reading. It's just so wonderful. And I want to read a poem from my Mad Hat Press book, A Passable Man. I was going to read a different poem, and then DeWitt mentioned Tom Lux. So I'd like to read a poem from the book that's dedicated to him, a poet I adore and a man I miss every day. This is called The Tinies, for Thomas Lux. Bless them, the tinies. Sipping a drop of tea from an acorn cap, changing a flat on a Lego car, the color of daffodils. How I love them, the tinies, always on the lookout for the blind foot, the mouse sozzled and reeling from the meat of a turned apple. This one digs down through her handbag, one pea skin. Do you have the keys, Harry? The tinies, who will care for them? Who will help paint their living rooms with a blueberry? Who can possibly tie their shoes if they hurt their fingers? The tinies skip stones in the bird bath, set sail across a swimming pool with a week's worth of provisions meticulously cataloged. Oh, you tinies, who will protect you? Danger is a storm the size of a hat. Death waits in the black thread of shadow that trails from a needle of grass. And yet, they know it is a world of joy, these tinies, large as it is, large as it is. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Danger is a storm the size of a hat. Now, I wish that was the only danger I had in my life. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you. Next, we have one of everybody's favorites here. It's Cindy Hockman. She usually goes last, but I thought I'd change it up a little bit and reverse her and Bob. And so Cindy is next.
Okay. Can you hear me, everyone?
Perfectly.
Perfect. This poem, and by the way, congratulations to Ploughshares, one of my favorite magazines, and to DeWitt and John, who are fantastic, and all the readers who were inspiring. I feel like writing. This poem is about poetry rejection. And I'm glad to say it's not about Ploughshares rejecting my poems, because I never sent anything to Ploughshares. But it's about Rattle magazine, which some of you have been published in. And I'm glad Tim Green is not here to hear this, although he read it and he rejected it. It's called Ode to Rattle. For the good editors at Rattle magazine who turned down all my poems, including this one. Plump babies in their prams and cribs, shaking their revolutionary rattles, their new teeth rattle and gnash. Some things rattle in the state of Denmark, and this poem has rattled around in my addled head since the first rattle of time, when the earth rattled in its molten core. Do you know the history of the world, how it all began? Let me rattle it off for you. That rascal, the rattlesnake, caused Eve to rattle her seductive fig at Adam. A typical wife, she ranted and rattled. God said, go forth and multiply like rattles. And then the red, red rattle came bobbing along. But love is a rattle field, and they rattled among the ruins. Oh, rattle, rattle, wherefore art thou rattle? Holy empires were built from all this. You remember the story of Romulus and rattle, civilization and all that, when man took his place among the ranked and rattle. But he soon found himself up the creek without a rattle. So he did some saber rattling, and that was the beginning of war, which did indeed shake our windows and rattle our walls. Still, we stood rough and rattle. We fought our own rattles, and when things got out of hand, we just swept it under the rattle. But old age is nothing to shake a rattle at. First, our tires rattle, then comes the rattle of body parts and bones as we smugly eat our rattled eggs and ham. And before you know it, that old death rattle is upon us, jarring us out of our consciousness. It's enough to get you really upset. Thank you.
And that's why I love Cindy. Can you believe it? She's so unique. She has such brilliant poems for us every week. And that was amazing. Love is a Rattlefield. Come on, you pulled out the Pat Benatar. I'm so impressed.
Ah, yeah.
So
You know
impressed.
Pat Benatar.
Thank
right.
you. And we're
Thank
going to end with Bob in his kitchen. So it feels like a lovely kind of family gesture to go from Cindy across to Bob in his kitchen. I'm never quite sure they're not in the same house, just in different rooms, but you know. Oh, Bob, can you unmute? Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Information. Confusing Adam. Sorry. Information. Confuses Adam and Eve with Dick and Jane. Confuses Santa Claus with God and the tree with a loving uncle. Confuses the sky with the ocean they are afraid to wade in. Confuses the fingers they count on with the explanation for goulash.
It's a unique way to end. I love it. I love it. Everyone should start their day. It's my beginning of my day here in Australia. Everyone should start their day with Bob's information or go to bed with Bob's information. I love it. Love the goulash line. And maybe you should show us your t-shirt, given that it's very kind of fitting today. He's going to give us a little fashion parade of his wonderful, which I think Cindy bought for his birthday, right?
Yeah, it was a birthday present from Cindy. So, and
there
it's
we
from
go.
the line in The Tempest, exit pursued by a bear.
Wonderful. Fabulous. What amazing open mic today, Mark. So I'm going to hand it back to you for the final words.
Thank you, Cassandra, and what a wonderful feature we had tonight. 50 years of Ploughshares Poetry. Amazing to have all those readers, Rebecca, Tatiana, John, and thanks so much to John Skoyles and DeWitt Henry for hosting this wonderful episode of Lit Balm. And just a reminder, next week we have Forrest Gander, Joe Safdie, Aliki Barnstone, and Liliana Sakelu. And here's a very short poem by Thomas Tranströmer to end the night with, and it's called Homewards. A telephone call ran out in the night. and glittered over the countryside and in the suburbs. Afterwards, I slept uneasily in the hotel bed. I was like the needle in a compass carried through the forest by an orienter with a thumping heart. And so let all our hearts thump together. Thank you for this wonderful night. John, DeWitt, Ploughshares, all you poets, all you lovers of poetry, sending you deep adoration, love, and unity, of course, with the people of Ukraine at the moment. And take care, be safe, be healthy, love each other. Love you all. Good night.
Thank you, Mark.
Peace, love, and goulash, I think, after Bob's poem.